Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Man Drew, and I'm here to do my breakdown for My Hero Academia, Season 6, Episode 17. And yes, this was the episode that everyone who has been watching the anime has been waiting for, the Todoroki flashback in full. So, let's dive right into this breakdown and talk a little bit more about it. For starters, the title of the episode is The Wrong Way to Put Out a Fire. And this is in reference to two manga chapters in the manga, chapters 301 and 302 with the exact same name, as well as what this episode covers along with chapter 303. And the first part of this episode actually starts off by seeing how Endeavor and Ray actually met. And to start off, we do have some added dialogue that is not in the manga pertaining to how Endeavor and Ray actually got together. And we get a better understanding of how this quirk marriage is actually disguised as an arranged marriage, as well as we get the reiteration and reestablishment of why Endeavor decided to take Ray as a wife to create a child that would have the perfect quirk to surpass All Might. And how that is done in a very interesting way that is not necessarily in the manga. And how the explanation for why Endeavor is doing this is done in a very interesting transition in the anime. And I would also like to point out just an added scene of just Endeavor sipping tea, which the anime did not need to add, but I'm glad that it did. And there is also some clarification for when it comes to the parent that is sitting next to Ray when they are talking about her arranged marriage with Endeavor, and it's revealed to be her father, and we see how scummy her father is when he's explaining her relationship to eventually be with Endeavor, as he says it with a slight smirk on his face. Really showing us that the fathers in My Hero Academia that are biological are not necessarily the best parents. And from there, we do see both Endeavor and Ray go on a somewhat date as we establish that Ray and her character is very strong-willed, but also can potentially be very fragile at the same time. And this is very interesting as it shows both Ray is very fragile and very strong-willed, which is something that we're going to be seeing in this episode. And what is very interesting about this is that we transition into the present where we see that Ray is still very much strong-willed, but later on in the episode, we're going to see how her fragility is actually put to the test. And after that, we do have the intro, but afterwards, we do get a slight focus on Dabi remembering what's going on with his father, and how Dabi knows that his father is still alive, as we also get to see Dabi thinking about his entire family, and his entire family finally beginning to look at him. And when he says this, we see that he begins to cry blood, which is a running motif when it comes to the character of Dabi, where we're going to be seeing him as Toya crying constantly due to his connection with his emotions and his quirk. And as the title drops, we can actually hear what we are assuming is a drop of blood, which is transitioning into the flashback with Toya and the Todoroki family, which is something that they do in the manga with the blood drop transitioning into another panel. And this is where we finally get the first look of what Toya looked like when he was very young. And right before we see Endeavor actually going to the hospital, specifically Central Hospital, to talk a little bit more to a doctor about Toya and his condition. And while we're in the Central Hospital, we do get confirmation that the doctor that Endeavor is talking to right now is not Dr. Garaki, which is an idea that many people had about the character because of how he was shrouded in shadows more or less in the manga. But now we have confirmation that he is a completely different character with a lot more different facial features, as he is also explaining to the Todoroki family what is going on with Toya with his ability to be able to use fire, but a body that is more suited for ice, as well as he brings up the idea of what they're doing with Toya as being taboo. But even then, we do get some added dialogue from the doctor explaining to the Todoroki parents why Toya cannot use his quirk and that doing so will burn him. And as this cuts in and transitions into getting to see an actually older Toya at this moment sitting next to Fuyumi. And in this scene, we do see that Toya is a little bit older, most likely, because we see that the hair color has changed significantly, going from completely red in the first scene to it being half white, half red now. And we also get potentially showing Toya, even at a young age, really showing these very negative qualities similar to Endeavor, but that he may also be a little bit more misogynistic when he is degrading Fuyumi for the fact that she wouldn't understand what's going on with him because she is a girl. And this revelation transitions into another scene where we get an added moment of Endeavor hitting the ground about how he is just extremely irritated by the fact that Toya cannot achieve his goal, and how he is trying to convince Rei to have another child to, in a way, stop Toya from hurting himself, as well as to achieve his goals later on. And as we are going to see more of the Todoroki family being born, we do get a small addition to the anime to really show the transition that time is moving forward, as we see a transition in the seasons, and how this transition is used to show the birth of Natsu. And as we are transitioning more into the birth of Shoto, we get an added scene to really emphasize the obsession that Endeavor is growing with the fact that he is not able to live up and become better than All Might. As we see that he is hitting the floor, as we get an added scene of All Might on the TV being more heroic and loved than Endeavor, and being a better hero, or being the number one hero, which Endeavor wants. And in the scene, there is a very horrible implication that potentially Endeavor may have forced himself upon to Rei to lead into what we get next, which is the birth of Shoto. And this is an implication that was not necessarily in the manga, but is a little bit more explicit in the anime. And I don't want to say what it is, but it does rhyme with grape. And after Shoto is born, we get a slight snow transition into Toya beginning to train using his quirk, as we see that he has a lot more obsession in his eyes than he used to, and how this obsession is leading Toya to severely hurt himself, which is going to anger Endeavor, as we see here, and how Endeavor has become a major influence to Toya's obsession. And as we reach a fever point in this episode, we do get an added scene of Rei attempting to use her quirk to actually cool off her son Toya. And when it comes to Rei, we rarely, if not ever, really get to see her actively use her quirk, so the added scene really adds to the world building and the story that is being told in this episode a little bit more. But as we see that Toya's hair is nearly white in this scene, we begin to see Toya finally break as he attacks his own younger brother Shoto in a very fantastic and dynamic scene where we do not see the actual attack, but we do see potentially the aftermath of the fire and the water, which is tears coming from Toya's eyes as the screen goes black. So from what we've covered so far, this really just shows how amazing the Todoroki storyline is in this episode and in this story, because we really get to see the real consequences and the real dangers that comes from parental abuse and parental neglect on a child, and how when it comes to the children that they are very much molded by who and what they are born from, but also just some instances of how they are born that they could have no control over whatsoever. And how the mixture of both genetics and nature may have created what Dabi is right now. And from here, this is where we get more and more parental abuse and neglect from Endeavor and Rei. Because as we see that, and the implication is that Endeavor did prevent Toya from hurting Shoto, but this leads into what we got earlier on in the series of Shoto being isolated from his family members and leading to a lot more conflict between Endeavor and Rei. And this is where in the manga we have a 5-year time skip, but it is not explicitly stated to be so in the anime. All we get to see is the Todoroki siblings of Rei, Fuyumi, and Toya asking to go out and play with one another. And this is where we get probably one of the more infamous scenes of My Hero Academia actually corrected in the proper story. And that is the original flashback that we saw of Shoto and his family during the sports festival arc when we first learned about his backstory and how he was isolated from his family members. Where in that scene, we are introduced to Toya from the back, but his hair was red, which was an accident because it was actually white in the manga. But we pretty much see that entire scene reanimated correctly as we get a perspective change to seeing Toya and how he reacted to the situation, while also expanding on how Shoto felt in that moment. And here's where we get a little bit more of Toya's mindset and how he potentially almost gaslit his own brother into trying to side with him and trying to shift the responsibility of what happened more on Endeavor. And how this leads to showing a little bit more misogynistic tendencies as he believes that the women in his household are useless. So this really shows that what is happening in the Todoroki family household has negatively affected Toya, but also has shown that he has had some tendencies that may not necessarily be associated with what is happening to a degree for it to be completely on Endeavor. And from that scene onward, we get to see Toya and Rei interact in probably the most emotionally charged scene in the entire episode. And that is when Toya lashes out at his own mother. Because as Rei tries to stop Toya from training and tries to explain it to him, Toya just snaps and goes off on his mother by saying some of the most horrible things that a child could say to their own parent. And the anime does it in a very impactful way when you compare it to how it was in the manga, where we see that the background changes color when Toya begins to hear what his mother is saying, but he also begins to tone it out as we see that her voice becomes more and more muffled before Toya says his horrible response. And how he more or less says that his mother was sold to his father and that she is at fault for everything that is happening, as we see Toya leave into the red background, indicating that he is leaving. And as the red background could be an indication not only of his rage, but his obsession, and how he's going to be going into a point of no return. And how in this moment, we actually hear the sound of something breaking, which would be at this moment Rei's sanity. And just showing how fragile it actually is to the point of it breaking. So I really did enjoy this scene and thought that it was done to a fantastic degree. But now we're shifting more into Toya's training, which we do get a change from the manga in the anime. In the manga, during his training, when it's explained that his fire goes from red to blue, we see that the flames in this scene are most likely blue fire, which kind of contradicts what we've seen, at least in the anime, when it comes to how Toya uses his blue fire on actual things, because we've seen that when he sets things on fire, that the fire still remains blue and doesn't turn orange like normal fire. But we see in the anime that the fire isn't blue, but that it actually flickers between the reddish orange and blue flames to indicate that his flames will eventually remain blue. But it also doesn't contradict the idea that the Todoroki family didn't know that Toya was actually Dabi by the color of his flames, because his flames don't completely change color in the anime as it does in the manga. So this is a very cool and neat change that really shows that the changes in the anime are consistent with what is in the anime, and that they're not just taking what's in the manga and applying it to the anime without understanding what was established prior in the anime. So it's cool to see how the anime is able to adapt stuff from the manga while also keeping consistent with what is actually in the anime. And once again, we do see that Toya is still very much obsessed about trying to please Endeavor, which leads to Endeavor finding out what's happening with Toya and leads to another confrontation with Rei. And in this moment, we actually hear and more or less see Endeavor actually hit his wife, as we see that Shoto is trying to fight back as Fuyumi as well as Natsu are hiding in the other room. Which really shows that Endeavor is very much an abusive husband and an abusive father in this moment, as we get that Rei's mindset began to collapse after this incident with both Endeavor and Toya, which makes her have this fear of the Todoroki male eyes, which would eventually lead to her throwing that hot water on Shoto's face, eventually causing the scar. So I really like that they were able to adapt the added scenes that were in the volume into the anime and didn't just leave it out or forget it. And we probably get to the most tragic part of the episode, which is the Toya Todoroki death, where we get to hear Endeavor and Rei talking about the incident in the present as we see what actually led to Toya's body being burned in the past, as we see the flames coming out of his eyes and setting himself and the entire forest on fire, which shows that the flames do have a tie to his emotion as well as has a tie to him crying, because the crying is representing him getting too emotional, which represents his flames and his fires going out of control, which also puts more of a fault on Endeavor, because Endeavor only taught Toya how to increase his fire and not decrease it. And we see that at this exact same moment, Dabi is also remembering it as well. And this is also where we get to see that the Todoroki family all takes responsibility for what happened with Toya. Endeavor for his neglect, Rei for succumbing to her fear, Fuyumi ignoring the problem, and Natsu feeling the guilt that he needed to do more. And with Natsu, there is a change from the manga in the anime, where in the manga he blames and wants to hit Endeavor for doing what he did, but in the anime he says that he wanted to knock some more sense into Toya. And this change isn't really that drastic to the story, but it does show that Natsu still feels guilty and still feels responsible what happened to his older brother. And with all the Todoroki stuff more or less settled, we do have Shoto beginning to have the resolve to work with Endeavor so that they can all be involved in stopping Toya. And at the same time, we do get to see Hawks and Genis come in, as a cut scene from the manga is not in the anime of them over listening to the entire conversation. And this also ties into a very funny scene of Rei bowing down and apologizing to Hawks because of what Dabi did to him. And we also get revealed that Best Jeanist and Hawks just wanted to get a little bit more intel on what's going on with Dabi to really understand why he did the things that he did and how he was able to survive everything. And how this leads to Hawks learning about how Shoto got his scar, him reflecting on his own personal life, and him showing respect to what Shoto was able to do. This leads more into what we get in chapter 302, with them trying to convey more information to Endeavor, who has been unconscious most of this time, and how they're talking about what happened with the remaining villains, what happened with the prison, what happened with the Hero Public Safety Commission, and finally what they're going to be doing with the involvement of other heroes from around the world coming to Japan. And we do get a few silhouettes of some potential heroes that may be involved in Japan. And most of these heroes are characters that we've actually seen in the My Hero Academia movies. Two of them actually come from the Two Heroes movie, which are Night King and Elecplant. And two of the other silhouettes that we see are actually heroes from World's Hero Mission, which are the characters of Big Red Dot and Salam. And to give a little bit more information on the heroes with the silhouettes, Salam is from Egypt, Big Red Dot is from Singapore, Elecplant is most likely from LA, and Night King is from Sudan. And the final hero, I'm going to keep a surprise, but I will say that they are also from America, and they go by the initials SNS. So as we see, Hawks and Best Jeanist are ready to fight alongside Endeavor, as we do get something very interesting that I'm glad that they included in this episode, which is the reintroduction of the focus on Hawks' back to indicate that he still has his fierce wings. This was something that I thought that they took out of the episode and took out of the season completely, but they actually moved it to this episode, which I am okay with. And with everyone pretty much ready to go and fight in this final battle, we do also get a little bit more of Hawks trying to infer what is going on with Endeavor and its connection with the idea of what One for All is. To which Endeavor connects it to Deku, which leads Hawks and Best Jeanist to go visit Deku, which leads into Bakugo being Bakugo and the kids having to take him away from causing a disturbance, as well as seeing the classmates of Midoriya worrying about him. And we do get the fun interaction that I was very looking forward to between Best Jeanist and Bakugo, but the episode does end with All Might hinting at the fact that Deku at this moment, even though he is in a coma, is actually communicating with the other vestiges of One for All as the episode ends. So, this was a very great episode for My Hero Academia. There was a lot of good animation, a lot of good additions that added to the story, as well as everything was pretty much added and included in the story with very minimal to nothing from the manga actually cut out. So far, the second core of My Hero Academia is going off without a hitch, and the next episode is going to be just as, if not more amazing. But yeah, that's pretty much everything that I have to say for this breakdown for My Hero Academia Season 6, Episode 17. So, what did you think of the episode? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? And was there anything that I missed from the episode that is actually in the manga? Or just anything that I missed at all? Leave your thoughts down in the comments down below, leave a like on the video if you liked it, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be notified for whenever I upload more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!